Yeah, thank you very much, everyone, for coming to present, but also for attending to watch. We have quite a lot of registrations for this event. I just checked just now, and it was 36, so there may still be some more people joining. We are recording this session, and it will be going online after the session. I'll cut out the bit at the beginning where we have the technical problems, of course. So it will all look very professional, but this will be available online, so please bear that in mind. I'm going to start with a very brief introduction, say a bit about the network, the Games and International Law Teaching Network, and how it came about and what we hope to do and what we're doing. So the network came about really just out of a conversation between myself and Catherine Fortin, who I believe is also with us today, from Utrecht University, and then together with Rebecca Sutton from the University of Glasgow, we got together to talk about how we could set something up, some kind of way of communicating, way of cooperating to bring people together to explore how we can use games in teaching, how we can use that as a method of learning, as a method of engaging students and engaging people with, primarily from our interest, the law. But in many of the events that we've looked at so far, or that we've organized so far, it's gone beyond just legal teaching. So that's been really great. And this is the third in a series of events that we've organized. The first was on using escape rooms and escape games in teaching. The second was using board games, and now today we're looking at role play games and role play exercises more generally as a means to impart knowledge in the learning of students and others. So I'm really looking forward to this. We have a lot of very diverse presentations. We have 6 presentations today, some dual presenter presentations. Please try and keep to 10 minutes. I will give you a little bit of a warning when you're approaching the 10-minute mark. And then what we'll do is keep questions and stuff to the end. But the hope is that we can kind of draw some of the links between all of the different presentations and use this as a means to inform, to inspire, and for people to get ideas for maybe what they could take away from this and what they could do in their own teaching. I think the attendees, so those who aren't presenting, should be able to access the Q&A function. If you want to ask your question in person, not in person, but if you want us to be able to see you and for you to be able to speak rather than writing it down, then you should be able to raise your hand and then I can give you permissions to speak. But we will leave that to the end in any case. Okay, then without further ado, I would like to first introduce our first speaker, Dalaki Livingston from the University of Utah. Dalaki, over to you whenever you are ready.
Hello, sorry, I have been fighting my camera this entire time. And we are good to go. Let me share. How do I share? There we go, boom, share.
Yeah, you should have a share button at the top right.
You got it. Thank you so much. Yate Abena, my name is Dalaki Livingston.
I think you've muted yourself down there. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, there we go. And I'm going to go ahead and share PowerPoint because I figured what's a presentation with a little bit of visuals. I'll go ahead and do this as well. So I'm at the University of Utah. I'm a postdoc fellow at the Department of Communication. Apologize. Like previously stated, it is 7:30 a.m. Where I'm at, so my voice is not adjusted to waking up. But I love to be here. I'm excited to talk to you about tabletop role-playing games in specific and the use they are, not only in research, but also the possibility in creating communicative practices. I'm going to take a quick drink of water really quick. And hopefully I sound just a little bit better. So we're going to cover a couple things as we talk about role-playing games in particular, basic terminology in use, what deliberation is, that's my area of expertise, as well as Indigenous methodologies, and how they all come together, intertwine in this evolving use of tabletop role-playing games. So first and foremost, in tabletop role-playing games, there's a couple terminologies that we like to use. First off is player. So sometimes when we're playing games where this type of game is very different than a board game, it's different than a video game, the idea is that you sit around a table in most instances of tabletop role-playing games, and you tell a story together. And it's facilitated through rules and through a system, if you will. It helps guide the story along. So if everyone's playing by the same rules, just like when we were kids, when we played make believe, like, hey, I have this galactic laser beam, and like, oh, I have this this horse that also sings fables, etc. But if everyone has the same set of rules, then everyone can tell more of a cohesive story. And usually the place or responsibility falls upon someone called a game facilitator. This is also known as a dungeon master, game master, saga guide, story guide. And game facilitators do a really important job of helping they're arbiters of rules, tell about consequences and how those kind of are what you do and what happens. And so you have individuals around a table. They usually pilot or navigate one single character, and those characters are called player characters. And so you have players, you have game facilitators, and they're all working together for this collaborative storytelling, meaning each person is adding to the overall story and also to the conclusion, the decisions, as well as the hardships, triumphs, etc. So that's kind of for those that don't know what role-playing games are. This is the conversation I have consistently over holidays with my family, and also I'm trying to think of the other terminology for holidays, for across the pond. What is it? It's it's a holiday. I think it's holiday. It has been a week. But what I love about role-playing games is they have a lot of uses. We see them through a lot of different disciplines. So first and foremost, we see it kind of used role-playing in mock court. You're creating a fictitious scenario that is based in some sort of reality or set in some sort of rules, and it's used to teach. It's used to navigate these spaces to develop skills, communicative practices, reasoning, critical thinking, working on your feet, improvising. This is also used in ethic case studies, especially in the US. Several of the ethics classes I've been taking, and also some that I've taught. We use case studies to create scenarios that are fictitious, but at the same time, they're built within this realm of possibility so people can navigate larger and harder conversations. Another interesting use of role-playing is through deliberation scenarios. And we're going to go ad nauseum, hopefully, to the extent in my next slide about what deliberation is. But the idea is, once again, creating a realistic scenario that people navigate the hardships, the underpinnings that the situation is calling for. And what I'm very excited for, and probably more excited for than my own presentation, is that everyone else is going to have the opportunity to build upon what I'm talking about today. So colleagues on this panel, I look forward to seeing how you use role-playing in your various different disciplines and etc. And this is where I take my very needed water break. Okay. So why role-playing? We see it used, we see its effects, and a lot of people are like, what's the point of role-playing? And there's a lot of important microcosms of communicative practices that happen in the realm of role-playing. We're creating not only situation scenarios that are to a degree believable by the rule set presented, but it's also an important way for us to engage with one another on very important and sometimes hard to replicate situations. And so because role playing has such an important role in not only in the research that I do, and not only in the research I do, but also my leisure time as well. And so some background as well to help build some ethos and logos and all the other O's. I have been playing tabletop role-playing games for the last 7, 8 years. I've been a game facilitator for various different games for over 10,000 hours. I think it's 10,000 hours now. It's been quite a bit. I was, it was my release, etc. And then also I started using it in my research. And then also in deliberation. So this is a type of democratic theory where it really builds upon this idea of community engagement. So the type of enclave deliberation that I am participation that I help plan, help not only help plan but help facilitate as well as evaluate. The type of deliberation do is that where you gather people from the community upon some sort of topic that is not only important to the community, but also has larger implications, whether it's policy, research practices, health concerns. And so you bring people from the community, we range from 15 to 20 people, into a room between 1 to 2 days, depending on time, funding, resources, etc. And you have someone coming in there facilitating the conversation so people can have in-depth conversations about the particular topic. And so it's like, hey, for instance, recently we were talking about research practices on different federally recognized tribal land. And these type of deliberations were co-created with those people from the community, and it was a way to engage the community, like, hey, what type of research practices do we want to have surrounding genetic and genomic research? And so those conversations, what happens through those 1 to 2 days, is not only do the groups get to talk in smaller groups, but also they get to engage with professional presentations. So expert presenters come and give the pros and the cons, trying to lay out all of the warts and all the hiccups and all the benefits and all the conditions that this type of research will have for the community. And then they get to engage with them, engage with each other. And recently, the reason that this is such an important part of the democratic process is those findings are generated and then distributed to the community at large. So it helps get everyone involved in the conversation so they can start having these conversations beyond the time that we have the deliberation. And so this is highly effective, not only internationally, but as well throughout the states through various different programs like Healthy Democracy, and also CIGR, the Center for Ethics for Indigenous Genomic Research. I feel like I've finally graduated from my PhD program because I said that particular what is it now? I can't without pause. So I knew exactly what that was without having to think about it. But also in these scenarios, they were built within the reality of those participants. And so, for example, one of the scenarios was like, hey, what if your parent wanted to, and like, hey, this parent wanted to engage in genetic testing from one of these commercial, like 23andMe, and we give kind of a couple examples, but they are hesitant because of A, B, or C. They come and confide in you, and they've already started filling out the documents, etc. What would be your concerns? And so for the next several minutes, they engage with that scenario about how they're feeling, how they're going to talk with that person. What are they going to do in response to that? Are they going to research things? Are they going to explore the scenario and how they explore it and how they engage, not only with the fictitious situation, but also with the realistic people in their lives? And so because of these scenarios, engage topics in a way that's different and unique, this really adds to this idea of not only participatory democracy, but also this collaborative storytelling. We like to talk in stories. That's one of our favorite ways to relay information. And because of that, its deliberation offers the opportunity for stories to blossom and to be used to help educate and to explore sometimes complicated, but often difficult topics. So as I was talking previously, that this also falls into the realm of Indigenous methodologies. Now, this is an entire, this one slide could be stretched into an entire course at your universities, but I'm going to try and keep it short and concise, probably a better word, to talk about it. So, one second. I have to hydrate. So the PhD program that I was participating in at the University of Oklahoma, I stumbled into tabletop role-playing games, and I realized I really love telling stories. I love gathering my friends together. I love this idea that we co-create this epic campaign, this epic fantasy, and we get to explore various different types of fantastical situations. Um, but that's when it kind of hit me that maybe this delves a little bit deeper. And so I myself am a member of the Navajo Nation. I'm Diné. My father is Navajo. My mother is, in her words, a European cocktail. So she's from a various different types of countries from Europe. And I was talking to my father about it. I'm like, I really love this. I love telling stories. And he's like, that's because I taught you indigenous ways. And I'm like, what do you mean? And so I don't speak Navajo, but he still taught me indigenous teachings and philosophically and these underpinnings of how the world works and these connections that we have. If I had a little bit longer time, I'd go through the entire Navajo introduction, which situates myself not only with who I'm talking with, but also where I come from. And those connections bring us all together. And that's what role playing can do as well. It brings us together. Now, indigenous methodologies, they grew and were fostered separate from Western ideas of what knowledge creation is. We have Albert Einstein, we have philosophers, we have Freud, etc. But other indigenous people have their own philosophers, their own stories, their own Albert Einsteins, their own Freuds, etc. And because of that, those knowledge bases, they feel different than Western practices. And so we see that mirrored in role playing, specifically tabletop role playing games, because the goal of the game is not to win, it's to tell the story. And because the nature of the game changes, applying indigenous methodologies, philosophical underpinnings surrounding that can help enlighten us about how to proceed further into engaging with not only different communities, but a variety of people. So, like I said, this is very much an introduction to what everyone else is going to be talking about in their respective in their respective 10 minutes. But I just want a really quick summary. I think I'm getting close to time. If not, we'll pretend. So that's the best part about role-playing games. Just once again, role-playing games, they help with communicative practices, problem solving, as well as conflict management, but also a creative engagement environment where you can start exploring parts of you and maybe parts other people are hard to share in just a normal setting in unique creative ways. The most important aspect of role-playing games for me is generating community. You have people you care about, you have people you love, and even the fictitious people they create as well. Because it is set in a reality that is shared, it also can be explored and if you would like this terminology, cross the streams with not only realistic and potentially problematic situations, but also unique and fun and exhilarating stories to tell. So, thank you so much. That has been the extent of what I had planned today. I could talk ad nauseum to this, but I'm excited to hear about everyone else and about how even now we're creating community and talking about gaming and how that can enrich not only our lives, the things that we research, but also the students that we might touch through our teaching. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chris. Not Chris, sorry, Dalaki. Now we're going to move on to Chris. Yeah, Christopher Stuart from the University of North Carolina, Wilmington. We'll move on quite swiftly. I'm sure there are questions and comments and stuff, but we'll try and go through everything and then have the discussion at the end. Because that will also, I think, enable us to draw the connections between the different presentations quite nicely, hopefully. So yeah, I hand over to you, Chris, whenever you're ready.
All right. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I can see your slides as well.
Thank you so much. All right, so my name is Christopher Stuart. I'm from the University of North Carolina, Wilmington. This presentation was part of a much larger presentation that I gave recently, but that QR code will bring you to the slides and I could share them afterwards because there's a bunch of things on these slides that I thought that were really important for this talk, but I just wasn't going to get to them, but I wanted to provide them anyway. So my talk is going to kind of build on what Dalaki did, but I'm going to talk a little bit more about kind of the space in which we play. All right, so just as a quick introduction, whether you want the gaming side of it or the kind of like the CV side of it, but I have been a project manager for 9 years or a campaign facilitator for 9 years. I typically have 7 people at the table regularly and then 12 other people that kind of pop in and out. And being a game facilitator has so many different elements to it, such as technical writing, game design facilitator, a conflict mediator, scheduler, archivist, and content creator. I have played over 200 sessions in many different ways and experienced these in all different facets of play tables and play spaces, including the classroom. So if you're looking for some language to bring into the classroom about making games, facilitating games, or playing games, some of that is here for you. So a quick outline here. I'm not going to spend much time because I'm going to actually go through it, but talking about play, talking about the facilitator, talking about inclusivity at the table or the classroom. And then I have a bunch of different elements and tools that you can use in your place of play. So I actually really like the definition that Cambridge Dictionary gives on tabletop games. Specifically, people create and play the part of characters in a story that develops as the game is played. And Dalaki talked about it. The whole point of it is not to win, but to tell a story together, to collaborate on something. So most tabletop games, and I do say most because there are so many out there, but some of them have facilitators, some of them don't. They all have player characters of some kind. They're all about decision-making tools, rolling dice, cards, whatever that may be. And then, of course, social interaction. And Dalaki already talked about these, so I'm not going to go over them again. But the purpose here can be in many different ways. Multifaceted. And if we're going to bring a game into the classroom, it's really important to tie things to student learning outcomes. So this may help in some ways, but it could be for entertainment purposes, role-playing identity, problem solving, situational awareness, immersion, system identification, social skills, and the list really does go on. So a definition of play that I really like that I do tie to the classroom when I use games in the classroom. Playing is a fragile, tense activity prone to breakdowns. Individual play is a challenge to oneself to keep on playing. Collective play is a balancing act of egos and interests, of purposes and intentions. And if you are playing with students that are 18 years old versus students that are 40 years old, you're going to have very different experiences that come to the table, very different backgrounds and understandings of play, understandings of learning. And I really appreciate the latter part of the definition, the balancing act of egos and interests, because at the gaming table, whether it's in a classroom or not, there's a lot of egos to balance. But it's important to remember that we all play for different reasons. To play is to be human, as Miguel Sicard explains, and also everyone deserves to play. There should be a seat at every table for everyone because there's so many important aspects to play. I really like this concept of gaming fluency, which I use to justify play in my classroom. And the link to the book is at the end of the slideshow. But they say that we contend that learning to design games can engage youth in an equally wide range of valuable practices, all of which are complexly intertwined ecologies that help youth to coordinate multiple activities and types of meaning-making systems. Now, this is largely written about early grades, but it absolutely is scalable to any classroom and any type of student. And we are all students at heart as academics. So it's really important to link this to student learning outcomes. And I'm not going to go through examples or anything of all of these for the sake of time, but hopefully you can see how these could link to whatever the importance of your discipline, of your department, of your classroom, of your curriculum. You can map it in a lot of different ways. There's the creativity element. There's the critical lens, which I assume based on the title of the talks, quite a few people are going to be talking from that perspective. Technical learning, creating the systems themselves and what tools go along with that, but then also the experiential play of having students facilitate a game or to be a player in a game that you are facilitating in the classroom. So who's in charge? Well, kind of the game facilitator, but also kind of not. So Dalaki explained the role of the facilitator. If you look at the Dungeon Master's Guide from Dungeons and Dragons, there's a lot of terminology that is associated with the Dungeon Master or the game facilitator. Everything from a creative force to a mediator, an architect, everything else. Typically, the role is a collaborative world builder, so you are working with your players to create some type of framework and interesting characters to have conversations with one another. But it's also as a moderator and a guide, so you set boundaries, you mediate conflicts, you direct the focus of the players, you provide options, and also shifting focus between game and table. And this is very important for playing with students, understanding that there is the in-game and then the out-of-game, and you should be able to move fluently between them, but you need to have rules and everything else set up for that. They're also leader of ceremonies, so understanding the purpose, the assignments, the rules, the parameters of the play for the classroom, or again, just any play table. And then metacognition. It's really important from the top level to look down and have a holistic view of the session, asking for players or students to reflect on those critical moments, especially when things may get a little heated. So just an extension, here's some examples of how a facilitator may have to intervene. For instance, these are all responses that I've used before with players, but this system's not a combat simulator, like somebody that just wants to fight everything. I know what the book says, but we're using species instead of race at my table. So interjecting and having agency over even pre-written material to talk about critical topics. I know you don't care how graphic the description is, but they disagree, so on and so forth. But there's an importance to the facilitator as being mediator, but also having a shared understanding at the table of what those parameters are. So I've been running around with this concept. I don't love the terminology, but can I sell you a bridge? Can I sell you this way to bridge all these out of game experiences to the game experience and to create an inclusive, safe space for whoever is playing? So it's important to remember that tabletop role-playing games are all built different, and they're built on social interaction typically. The way that we engage with the social interaction is typically two different ways. We narrate in third person or we role play in first person. Both are fine, both are acceptable, but there's a lot of vulnerability in game experiences because you're leading with expression and improvisation. So having somebody that is more comfortable with narrating in the third person versus articulating everything to role play in first person, especially if you're working with critical issues and critical topics, it's important to distinguish between the two and reflect on those. And there's a lot of different ways that you can engage with these in a lot of different topics. But understanding the difference between narration and role play can be fruitful for that conversation. I'm going to move through these relatively quick for the sake of time, but there's a lot of information here that you can look at on your own. But it's important first to look at privilege, the facilitator's privilege, the player's privilege, of course, without assumption, to understand the baseline of everybody at the table. And it's most important with marginalized players, especially if you're working on something that has critical issues. It's also important to change the game based on what the player or the parameters of play are going to be. So you can make any change you want based on published or unpublished material. I also use a consent sheet. I use a modified version of what was published, but there's something called Consent in Gaming that was put out, and it's largely a survey based on comfort level of descriptions or certain topics that would be at the table. This can absolutely be edited for whatever classroom or whatever space you're working within. I don't love the survey because I think it's kind of, some of the choices are a little bit odd in my mind, which is why I use the same concept, but I changed some of the consent criteria. And then it's also important to remind players of the goal of the game. So this is a script that one game master uses whenever they start a table, even if it's with people that they have played with before. To kind of wrap up here, not all games fit all situations, so it's important to look at the setting or the theme of the game or what you intend on running. Low versus high complexity. How difficult is the game to understand? How long do you have to spend teaching the rules versus playing the game? Mechanics maketh experience. Mechanics have very strong rhetorical arguments, so what you can and cannot do. And yes, it is your table, so you can make some changes, but that's also important to look at with critical issues. Content warnings, of course, the lengths of play. Is it a 1-hour session versus a 30-hour session? And then economy of spotlight, making sure that everybody gets a say. And from here on are just some tools to look at, but the one I would like to highlight just very, very briefly is the stars and wishes. So if you're going to run a game, any game in a classroom, it's really important to have students reflect on that situation. So ask them what was their favorite part, but then also what do you wish was done differently? Not necessarily what they wish they did different, but it could just be literally anything like, hey, game facilitator, I really didn't like how you just cut away from that important moment. We didn't really get to explore that. But stars and wishes are a really great way of getting feedback, especially from players that are not very experienced. And like I said, I have a bunch of different tools here. Please feel free to look through them. And just for a final second, I'll throw that QR code back up there. But I will make sure that everybody has a link to this when it's sent out with the video, just so you can see the resources that I have gathered for you. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much, Chris. That was really good. Going to move swiftly on again to Tamar and Marie-Louise. So Tamar Tomashvili from the Free University of Tbilisi and IDLO, and Marie-Louise Tougas from the ICRC. I am going to share my screen for your slides, and then just say slide when you want me to move on to the next one.
Thank you, Sally. So as noted by Sally, it's going to be 2 of us. We're going to share the slides and we will try to stick to 10 minutes. If you can show the slides, it will be easier. So unlike perhaps the previous presenters, we are actually presenting a competition, which is a Jean Pictet competition in international humanitarian law. And as you see at the first slide, the cover is, our motto is very simple: taking the law out of the books. And I think it very well sits with the previous presenters when they were looking at the active learning component and problem solving in realistic situation. Perhaps just one observation from myself. I'm not only the organizer along with Marie-Lou, I'm a participant who participated in this competition 21 years ago. I'm a former state agent who participated in peace negotiations and treaty negotiations, and the experience of the competition was unique and the most helpful thing for me. I'm a professor who has actually transpired the knowledge and practical examples from this competition in my teaching, and I use it while teaching public international law and laws applicable in armed conflicts. And fourth observation, I have seen regional and national competitions which have been modeled after the Jean Pictet competition. But I think the most important is for us to trace the impact and to talk about the group of alumni which we have. We will come back to that. But the experience, I think, which has been for us the most valued experience in the Jean Pictet competition, when you see the former participants at the negotiation table using the law in a manner it is supposed to be used, and using the skills that we have taught them during the competition in real life. That's one of the objectives. Two other observations, and then we can move to the competition itself, is that we not only look at the practical aspect of laws applicable in armed conflicts, but also we want to instill the values. That's very important for us. And this is very well linked to the discussion when previous presenters actually mentioned diversity. I think what we love the most in the competition, when we see teams, law students coming from different continents of the world, when we see the teams coming from the countries which are currently in an international armed conflict, when we see teams coming from states where they might be warring with the non-state actors, and when they sit together and try to understand each other's positions. And that's also an important learning component, because in real life, it's one thing what you are taught in law, in theory, but it's totally different applying it, listening to other party and trying to find a solution. And I think for us, it's the most values when we see as new, let's say, I would call them change agents. For me, the alumni of the Pictet, which we have been observing, being also decision makers. Maybe if the time allows, I will give you some examples. If you can move to the next slide, Sally. So as you can see, we put it at the beginning: compete, learn, and meet. Indeed, the first objective for us is the competition and linked to the learning, because it's a competition where the law students in a team of 3 persons participate. It's also for us the active learning aspect, because we use fictitious scenarios every year. New scenarios which we come up within a group of the persons. I think what makes Jean Pictet competition different from the static moot courts or mock trials that are used in law teaching is that we do simulations, role plays throughout 1 week, which develops at least twice per day. So it's not a static scenario. We develop the roles and scenarios on spot as the game develops throughout the week. This is the one thing. We adjust it to the issues that are pertinent in those years in the world. So we bring better understanding about the values, humanitarian values, what needs to be protected, particularly in conflicts that are ongoing, for example, in 2024, or would be relevant in 2025. And as I noted, for us, it's also important that students meet. And this meeting is an engagement between different continents, but also with the people we bring as the jury members, as the tutors, and I will speak briefly at the end of the presentation who are there, to engage with the practitioners in the field, humanitarian field, in international law related field, where they can learn from them what they can do in the future. So it's not only the opportunity for learning, but also for making. We, as you can see, I put it in 1989. The competition is 35 years old. It was established in 1989, and Jean Pictet is one of the famous scholars in international humanitarian law. He worked for the International Committee of the Red Cross that Marie-Louise represents, and he is also one of the authors, co-drafters of 1949 Geneva Conventions and 1977 Additional Protocol. And we are very much honored that he agreed that the competition was named after him. There is even the fund which until now supports the teams who are participating in the competition, Jean Pictet Fund. The second, the competition, in order to ensure diversity and inclusivity, at the beginning it was a French-speaking competition. Since 2000, we have it in two different languages, English and French, quite often simultaneously. For example, the upcoming session, which will take place in Antalya, Turkey, we will have French-speaking teams and English-speaking teams who compete in different groups, but in the finals, we might have French-speaking team competing against English-speaking team. For us, it's very critical to involve as much teams as possible. Therefore, we are using the languages which are the most popular, if we can say, so that the teams can compete, for example, from Africa, from Latin America, etc. So far, and I might be wrong because the number might be bigger, we have more than 4,800 alumni. This is what we call Pictet family. The former participants who have been participating in the competition, and I will let Marie-Lou also mention later how they come back. But let me give you some of the examples. Some of the alumni who come back and then invest on voluntary basis to assist the competition throughout the years, some of them have been advisors in the Joint Staff Forces in real wars. Some of them have been negotiating international treaties or being special rapporteurs of the members of the International Law Commission. Some of them we see also being agents representing states in international disputes. A lot of them work for international organizations, including international humanitarian organizations. So for us, it's a big family which have the same understanding of what are the humanitarian values that need to be preserved during the armed conflict. I stop here. Next slide, and Marie-Lou will take over.
Thank you, Tamar. Hi, everybody. I'm Marie-Louise Tougas. So as mentioned, I work as a legal advisor for the ICRC, and I've been involved in the Pictet competitions since, I think, 2007 or something like this in different capacity. And now I'm a member of the organizing committee. I will just go quickly through the process. How do we prepare and what happened after the competition, because I think it's important. Because it's a in situ competition, it's in a big hotel. Unfortunately, we cannot accommodate more than 48 teams at a time. In the past few years, we have decided to do 2 sessions per year so we can have more teams, but per session, it's more than 48. It's too complicated, and we're losing the meeting part that Tamar was mentioning, which is very important for us. So 48, it's really the maximum. So in order to somehow to select, we go through a selection process. The selection process is not a simulation because we cannot do this. So it's paper. It's actually based on 3 questions that the team have to answer. The first question, one question is usually more. It's a case study, but it's usually more traditional. For instance, you are the legal advisor to the armed forces of country X. Your unit is preparing this attack. What would be the different IHL rules applicable, or what would you recommend? Then we ask a second question, which is generally more broad, open, and creative. For instance, IHL and AI, IHL and the future, IHL and colors. We have had everything. And this is to give a space for the students to be a bit more creative, to often go back to the fundamental principles, and to go to really what is important in the rules of IHL. And the third question is about their motivation. So we look at why they want to take part in the competition. We also have then, once they are selected, we send them learning materials. So we have developed over the years a very complete now learning materials. Now we have an online course. So it's online modules on IHL. Why we do this? Because we have teams coming from all over the world and from universities where some of them have extensive course of IHL and some of them have none. And so we want all the team to come to the competition with at least a good understanding of IHL so they can enjoy as well the competition, they can take part in the role play, and they feel more comfortable. We also encourage a former participant to coach the new participants at their university. And this is important because why do we emphasize so much the preparation? Because as Tamar mentioned, it's a role play based on a scenario that will evolve over the week. Usually there's 2 tests per day, and the teams have very little time to prepare. It means they receive the scenario, they will receive an idea of the broad scenario, 2 or 3 countries are in conflict, or there is this occupation, or it can be anything before the competition. But at the competition, they will, sorry, I received a pop-up message and I was disconcentrated. But at the competition, when the tests start, they usually have between 0 minutes and 3 hours to prepare for the test. 3 hours being very a lot for semifinals and finals, but the usual time it's between 5-10 minutes to an hour, 2 hours. So they really need to know the law before. They need to be able to understand what the scenario involves in terms of rule, what they need to look at, and they need to be comfortable at role play, because it can be very destabilizing if you are not used to it. So we really encourage former students to play those games, play those roles with the future students, so they come prepared. Then there's the competition, and then Tamar will go a bit more in details how it works and how we do it. And then there's the network, and it's a very important part. I won't repeat what Tamar says, but after I can also add my own example. But it's a very broad and very powerful, I would say, network. In my job, in my current job at ICRC, but also in my former capacity when I was an IHL expert for the sanction committee on Yemen for the Security Council, I keep meeting in my professional life former participant. And so we really emphasize the importance of the network. We ensure everybody stay in touch, stay in contact, and we encourage former participants to come back to the competition as a volunteer, either as a tutor, as a jury, or a kitchen member. Tamar will explain what this means. And this is also how we keep the former participants involved into the big family. So we have many of them coming on their own time and during their holidays for the week with us to take a part in this competition. And we also see, and this is very nice, we see them growing professionally. So usually when they participate, they're a student. The first time they come, they may be a PhD student or an intern, and then 10 years later, they have a very senior position. And we're very proud to have them in our family. I think we can turn to the next slide, and I will turn back to Tamar again, and be happy to answer any questions afterwards. Tamar, over to you.
Tamar, can I ask you to fast track this last part, just because we're at 15 minutes?
Let's not show the last one, but maybe I explain a little bit what does this stand for, these pictures. If you look at on the far left side, there is a person near the computer. He is the national administrator, but also the founder of the Jean Pictet competition, one of the founders, Christophe Lenord, which is, let's say, a living heart of the competition. Let me explain the role play. Maybe this will be the most important, and during the Q&A session, we can answer the system of judging as well as what the kitchen is. We said that the scenario evolves, and it's a role play. Starting from, for example, having a Security Council modeling or General Assembly session modeling, ending up with the field mission. You see there is people in the dungeon, which are the jury members who are detainees. And so the teams might have a role play where they have to go and be a member of humanitarian organization inquiring into the treatment of the detainees to properly qualify the situation, but also to ask the questions, because 50%, if not more, of using the law in reality is knowing, having proper skills, how to get the information, okay? How to properly assess the picture before you. On the left side, you see a person who is again the jury member who is tied up, blindsided, and he's actually playing a prisoner of war. So again, it's a practical exercise of making the appraisal of the situation where the teams have to be sensitive to his situation but ask the right questions. Then we do have more legal cases where the teams are, for example, negotiating a peace treaty or ceasefire agreement. We have a situation where we might have joint staff forces, military analysts or military advisors meeting and deciding what to bomb certain objective or not. Again, playing a very specific role, playing the role of the ministries who have to make a political decision. Or on the left side, you see the shoe, going to a very specific exhibition to negotiate certain deal. And basically in that test, teams have to stand. They don't even have an opportunity to sit. And within the 20 minutes to try and negotiate prison release. So idea for us in real life is to put students in the shoes of lawyers who make these decisions in real life. So they try to adjust knowledge and skill and make responsible and right decisions. I stop here for the time being, and maybe in Q&A session we try to give more information.
Thank you very much, Tamar and Marie-Louise. Really nice how we're starting to see like the links between the different presentations already. I'm going to jump straight on to Joseph Walton, Joe, from the University of Sussex. Joe, I don't see you. Oh, there you are. Can
Hello.
hear no image yet.
Wow, really, really fantastic to get glimpses into what everybody is doing. I thought today I would just really briefly share some resources really and highlight some of the is kind of relevant. Let me know if you're not seeing slides, otherwise I will assume it's all working fine.
I'm not seeing any slides.
No, neither am I actually, mate. Here we go. Better?
Yes. No.
Okay. Well, in the meanwhile, I guess I can tell you a little bit about me. So I teach literature, cultural studies, and recently sustainability, climate change in particular. And I played a lot of role-playing games as a kid and sort of came back to it as a hobby and have increasingly been using it in my teaching and my research. If we don't have any slides, I guess I could share the link.
Slides are up now, yeah.
They are up, brilliant, okay. So the first provocation is that teaching is already a role-playing game and you're probably already using it in your teaching, whether you think of it that way or not. For me, the kind of fundamental scene of learning is that moment when you reflect back to a student their comment or their question in a way that enriches it or unlocks the kind of latent potentials there. And I think that's a moment that is very familiar from somebody who has anybody kind of facilitated, game mastered, been a storyteller in a role-playing game. And of course, as that storytelling gets more iterative, as those feedback loops become kind of more solid and predictable, as we start building worlds, identifying with characters, then we get towards what we might think of as tabletop role-playing games. Then there are the game mechanics, and game mechanics are also already in pretty much every classroom. Every time you come up with a constraint that you think is going to be generative in some way that is going to change behaviors, create new affordances. When you say you've only got 5 minutes, or when you say get into groups of 3, that's a kind of game mechanic. And of course, as we introduce more complex game mechanics, competition, structured collaboration, points, currency, randomness, then we get closer towards what we would think of as a tabletop role-playing game. Those 2 spectrums can be arranged in a 4-quadrant grid, which I didn't do because I thought we had those in the world. So let's move straight on to some resources. The most kind of extensive work that I've done in terms of game design has been under this project, Imagine Alternatives, the biggest part of which is this game to date, Kampala Yingcha, which is translates as Kampala of tomorrow. And the thinking here was that the way that we envision the future can be a resource for decision making in the present. And African speculative cultures have been somewhat underused in educational spaces and in policy spaces as a kind of applied resource for thinking about sustainability, climate change, and climate justice. So together with some fantastic collaborators, we created this game, Kampala Yingcha. And although this is the most I've ever worked on a tabletop role-playing game in an educational context, I have never got to run it because it's only been run in Uganda and I haven't had a chance to visit. So it's all been kind of done remotely. I based the mechanics on Avery Alder's fabulous and influential The Quiet Year, but they evolved quite a lot during play testing and iteration. And I think, you know, an important point for any educator is that this is, if you're not sure where to begin, the place to begin is always by taking an existing game and adapting it, adapting some element of it, simplifying it, applying kind of domain knowledge. There are these things called system reference documents out there. If you search for them online, they're kind of stripped back versions of games that are really inviting this sort of treatment. They're asking to be adapted, to be hacked. And because games have this quality that they can be easily kind of iterated and evolved and transformed, Kampala Yingcha itself has had some kind of spin-offs. And some of these I have had the chance to play or to run. Seaweed City was a version that I played with a bunch of kids, and just frantic and exciting, and the most adrenaline that has ever been in my body at one moment in my life. Creating with Uncertainty, Values in Research actually starts thinking less about kind of imagining a future positive vision of the climate, and more about thinking about values in scientific research, how we conduct scientific research responsibly, ethically, and justly. And if you're interested in how you might approach taking a game and adapting it to some particular domain or some particular set of learning outcomes, I am a minor contributor to this book, the Serious Games Cookbook, which is aimed at you for that purpose exactly. This is something called Utopia on the Tabletop, which is a sort of more like a traditional scholarly collection, but it's a little bit strange because it's role-playing games and we wouldn't want to do things in the most obvious way. It does contain 2 games, and it contains some dialogues, and there's some kind of practitioner reflections alongside more traditional scholarship. And so there's some stuff in there at the intersection of utopia studies and tabletop role-playing game studies, which I think would be of interest to a lot of educators. The digital sustainability game is something else that I've been working on, and this is really thinking again about kind of sustainability, climate justice, and so on, but really focusing on the impacts and the potentials of digital technology. Created with Natalie Hugler, Daniel Locke, and Florence Okoye. And I kind of included this as an example of something that maybe hasn't quite found its relationship with storytelling and the imagination yet. So digital sustainability is a complex and often dry subject, and we try and deliver this in snappy workshops. People want to do this for 2 hours. It might be hard to find 3 hours, 4 hours, or a whole day to think about the material climatic impacts of the digital. And so you've got a lot of material to get through. And I think we're just still trying to kind of calibrate how much imagination, how much kind of storytelling, and how complex a rule set we can combine with all the kind of content that we want to deliver. It turns out, I think, that maybe the playing aspect of this is fairly light. Each team will take up the role of a company or an organization, and imagine that organization evolving through the next decades, to make its use of technology kind of more sustainable. And we use this card deck to give prompts of events that might happen, as well as resources that they might use to achieve that. And then finally, Serious Play podcast is just something that I kind of want to recommend. I'm on one episode. It might not be the best of the episodes. I'd recommend listening to the other ones first, but it's a fabulous little podcast by some researchers thinking about the use of tabletop role-playing games within research, especially as well as teaching. And this is Sad Press Games is kind of where I collect a lot of my role-playing stuff, both the education and research stuff, and also the stuff that's just there for fun, to let off steam. And one of the things that you'll find there are some of these system reference documents, some that I've created myself, but also that link at the bottom is a crowdsourced list of hackable system reference documents, which might be useful for any educator who wants to kind of explore creating their own tabletop role-playing games. Thank you very much. Looking forward to some more chat.
Thank you very much, Joe. Right. Next up, we have Wouter Werner of UvA, the University of Amsterdam. Wouter, over to you when you're ready.
Thank you. I'm actually from the Free University, not from the University of Amsterdam, but in Amsterdam, that's correct. So I was asked to talk about experimental mood and reenactment. I think that's a bit too much. So I'm going to focus on the thing that we've been working on the past few months, and it's actually taking place next week in a theater in Amsterdam West. And that's the reenactment part. So I'm going to share some slides if it works, and then take you through it.
We can see the slides, yeah.
You can see them. Okay. So I basically want to talk about reenactment as a pedagogical tool. And I think most of you recognize the guy in the picture. That's Bertolt Brecht, who is a big source of inspiration for what we have been doing in the past years. So I would agree with Tamar and Marie-Louise, who characterized mood courts as static. And I do have some more issues with traditional mood courts. So we really try to develop experimental forms of mood courting, which are collaborative, non-competitive, based on real life situations. But in this project, we want to take it a bit further under the influence of, among others, the work of Bertolt Brecht. So it's inspired by this tradition in theater, the ad verbatim theater, where you take the transcripts of a court case or the transcripts of a parliamentary hearing, and you use them as material to develop a theater script and then perform it. So you don't write anything, but you do edit quite severely. And that's also what we do in this project. And then, of course, if you do a reenactment and if you take things from transcripts, sometimes the idea is, okay, we need to get as close as possible to how it really was. So that's the purpose of the exercise, to get real and practical and a veracity. And I would say it's the opposite, because what you do in this reenactment is to link to reality in order to create distance to reality, very much like in Brechtian theater. So it's not about copy-pasting reality, but what Søren Kierkegaard, the Danish philosopher, said in terms of repetition, what you do in theater, for example, you rehearse, you repeat and you repeat in order to get in the moment. So you do the same in order to create something really new. And that is also the underlying idea here. So it's about reappropriation in a way, right? So the people that reenact make it as if for the first time, but it is also a repetition. So what are some of these Brechtian influences then in what we do? So first of all, the case is real and it matters, because that's quite often a problem with traditional moot courts. Nobody cares really what this case is about, because the states don't exist. There's no follow-up to the case. Anyhow, there's hardly ever a decision to begin with. It's all about outperforming other teams. Whereas here, the case is real and there's something at stake. Secondly, if people perform, the distance in the performance is crucial. So no immersion in your role, but a distance to the character that you're playing. And very importantly, reflection sessions after the performance. So not an assessment, how well you performed, but a discussion on what happened. And what happened can be different for different people in the audience. And that's exactly what we also got out of it. So these are some basic ideas. Now to make it a bit more concrete, I'll make it a bit more concrete after this slide. So what does this method allow for? One thing that I find really interesting is that it allows you to articulate all the affective and emotional things that are going on in court cases, which are never articulated in law books, and also marginally touch upon in mock and moot courts. Whereas if you go through the transcripts and if you perform it, you can use theatrical means, props, etc., to make them visible and feelable. It becomes very clear that a court case has different audiences, and different audience takes different things out of a court case. So it's not only about convincing the judges, but it's really about communication in a very particular ritualized form. The politics of law, strategies, narration of history, it's all out in the open and there's no way around it. And something that I personally very much like is the mundaneness of legal proceedings. The alter human nature. So you see the interactions between a judge and a witness, and the witness plays on the vanity of the judge, for example. Or a witness has to swear the oath, but it fails. And the transcripts go on for 3 pages because the oath still has to be sworn in the correct way, right? So you get these really mundane day-to-day things, which are sometimes also really funny to perform. Okay, now we'll get more concrete. So what did we do? So I did this together with Sarah Nouwen from the European Institute in Florence. And what we did, we went through the transcripts of the Dominique Ongwen case before the International Criminal Court. The case being discussed extensively in literature for good reasons. But we went through these tens of thousands of pages of the transcripts, and we reworked this into this script, which looks very mundane too, but I'm very proud of it because it was a huge task. So we made this into a script that could be performed of around 100 pages. There was a summer school in Florence in June this year where this was performed by students, but also by professionals. Judges were there, prosecutors were there, members of parliament, so all kinds of different people, but the big majority were students. And in 2 weeks we performed this. And then after every performance, we had a reflection session, and we also, because the case is about, of course, the conflict in Uganda, we had legal experts, we had Ugandan negotiators, activists to reflect on this case, and also some people from the Acholi community where Ongwen was from, and we had these discussions. And all these things that I discussed before appeared somehow. Some also failed, and that's also interesting to see what failed and why. But what you did see was this distance. So the closer you got to the real transcripts, the more distance you got, because there is a presence of absence, because you reenact it. It's very clear that you are not Dominique Angwen, so he is very presently absent in the theater room. And the same goes for all the other characters. So you get the distance, you see the politics just emerge, you see the interpersonal relations, the boredom of the case. So we also make links to the theater of boredom, which I think is a very important message to communicate also to students. So, well, this week and next week, we do it again. But this time in a shorter version with teams from Rwanda, the Seychelles, Suriname, University of Groningen, and the Free University of Amsterdam. We move into a theater. We have 2 days of reenactments of scenes. And then on Saturday, we let the teams make their own closing statement. And the teams are always mixed, so you don't work in a team from your own university. We always mix them in order to have diversity within the teams. So that also leads to another round of intense communications. We did this after a few online prep sessions where we discussed the idea of politicization of trials, the genre of opening and closing statements, the history of Uganda, and the whole idea of a reenactment. So this is about to happen next week. So we'll see how it goes, because with different people, something different will be put on stage, I guess. And then as a follow-up, Sarah now and I are planning to write a textbook, but where a traditional textbook is both a model and is modeled, so you kind of can tell what is in the textbook, and then the textbook structures how you enter the field. We want to write almost a non-textbook based on the script, where because of the script and because of all these elements that I mentioned before, the unexpected elements, we hope to open up the field and to show sometimes the arbitrariness, the contingency that's all around in this field and in these trials. So I'll stop here so to move to the discussion.
Thank you very much. And yeah, apologies for mixing up Uwe and Vu there.
No problem. Now, how do I end my sharing? Do you know?
You should be able to click stop sharing.
Yeah, that's what
somewhere.
I hoped. Yeah.
I think it should be a red button somewhere, probably in the middle of the screen towards the top. I can't remember exactly where the button was. Somebody who last shared slides, do you remember exactly where the button was?
Oh, here, yes, I got it. Yeah,
I got it. Okay, good. Then thank you very much, and we will move on to our final presentation. I just stop that spotlight there. Simon Tans from the University of Wageningen and Stephanie Jansen-Willem from my university, Radboud University, Nijmegen. Over to you, Stephanie and Simon.
Thank you, Sarah. All is well. Presentation should be visible now. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so essentially we have a very practical role-playing game that we want to roll out on our, well, potentially 500 students, but in reality it will be less. And the idea we set out to create is we experienced that in the line of education of international law, students begin with introduction, of course, and then for a long time they have nothing because they are working on other courses, and then a year later they will follow up on some concepts, and another half year later and then again a year later, they will be dealing with other parts of international law. So what we have experienced is that there are clear gaps, and then obviously a year later you ask students, so as we told you, this concept, it works like that. And then students, yeah, of course, they have forgotten, and then lecturers have a tendency to go, how can you not remember this? But obviously they don't, or at least they have a vague inclination. So we wanted to deal with that, and that's where this idea originated. And so what we designed is a continuous case that runs the entire bachelor program, so 3 years. And every time a new course is introduced to the students, the case is expanded with the concepts of that course. And obviously, when they are in their second or third year, it allows us to repeat concepts that were taught in, for instance, the introductory year. So the case expands in complexity, and topics keep being added to it. And well, at the end of the B3 year, it's in full complexity. Now, the idea of the game that they play, or if you can call it a game, is that they play a role. For instance, they are part of NATO, or they're part of the UN, or they're part of the European Union. And they have to respond to a crisis, which we will show you later in this presentation. And they have to do so from the perspective of their role. And our idea further is to, while they're playing, their actions have an influence on the case. So it's not a static concept. It's essentially depending on what students choose to do during the game, will impact the storyline, essentially. Now, what we also want to create is this buzz among students to keep them playing. So obviously, you have to get them hooked, which we try to do with the storyline. But we also intend to have Easter eggs in the game, maybe awards and recognitions. And in that way, for instance, if a student discovers something on, I will explain later in detail, but we have a video of an 8-hour video of a dike somewhere in the Netherlands, and somewhere around 2:30, suddenly somebody walks along that dike, and it is relevant for the story. But I doubt whether students will ever find it. But if they do, they have this Easter egg, and we hope to create a buzz with that. So that's the heart of what we're trying to do. Have them play roles. What they do matters, and obviously we are also able to intervene. Now, what we further plan to do is the game is a digital game. We'll get to that later, but it's hooked in the classes, so that they play it online. But we get back to what happened during classes in the 3 years of their educational program. So Stephanie will now explain a little bit how this concept is integrated in our educational program.
Yeah, so maybe it's good you skipped the part where you introduced us. It's good to know that we were colleagues as well. So we started this project quite a few years ago, when Simon was still part of Nijmegen. I still work as assistant professor of international law in Nijmegen. I'm not currently at a zoo, but I'm at home and my kids are here as well. So you might hear some background noises or see one of the kids pop in occasionally. So this is our bachelor program, European Law School, where students get European law, but also courses in Dutch law and international law. So what you see in the first year, in the first semester, they get an introductory course in international law, but then in the second semester, they get all kinds of courses, but no international law. In the second year, first semester, also no international law, and by the time Sally gets them in various concepts of international law, they forgot everything that we told them in the introductory course. There's an asterisk behind various concepts, because we also have a bunch of students who follow special track on French translation, and they do not follow various concepts. Also, moot court takes place there, where students can choose between EU law or international law. So we also have a few students that do not take international law there. Then in year 3, we see all the students again in a human rights course. But you can see here that some of them have not taken any international law for 2 years then. which is very difficult because then they really forgot everything. So these are these gaps that we need to bridge, and keep their knowledge active, keep repeating stuff. We also looked at the end of the bachelor. So what do we want them to know and to be able to do? So the secondary international law is that part where we talk about sources, subjects, state responsibility of international organizations. So the more the frameworks, immunities, that sort of things. And the substantive international law, we cannot do everything, but we want them at least to know about the use of force, a bit of laws of armed conflict, human rights law, international economic law. And here is also part of the role play, in particular, we want them to know a bit about, sort of life skills and academic skills that involve, for example, negotiation, to be able to convince someone of something, to get instructions and to do something with these instructions. And internships are really good for that. But I mean, it's really difficult to send our students on internships all over the world because some can simply not afford that, or it's just taking too much time out of their studies. Simon.
Yeah, so essentially what we're trying to do is the main objective is addressing the long periods in the curriculum when they do not study international law, and we try to bridge that gap with this continuous case. We let them practice with international law in the case, also on moments when there are no courses in international law. Of course, the challenge is it should not be too long because they're involved in other courses, but it should allow them to repeat certain concepts. So we are currently running a pilot, and we definitely intend to assess the outcomes of that to see whether it's too much, whether it's too little, how to keep them hooked in this concept, and whether it's indeed leading to retaining their knowledge. At the moment, it's really basic, so we are just repeating concepts. And we're introducing new concepts, but ultimately we may be able to create flexibility in the sense of some students can add certain concepts in the digital tool, while others choose other concepts in that. So it will hopefully also in the future lead to flexibility in their choice of the curriculum. And also future idea is to use it for examination purposes, but we're not there yet. So essentially what we'll do is show you the introductory video of our game. It is in Dutch, but we will be able to translate that.
Simon, you're not sharing sound.
Sorry?
You're not sharing the sound of
Oh, that's unfortunate. I'll just run the video, but there is a lot of ominous music in the background.
Maybe it makes sense to have a little bit of a live English language summary.
Yeah, so I was planning to do that at the end and just run the images because I am hearing the sound, but I think it takes too much time to share the sound with you. But essentially what you're hearing is a news report on attacks on the Dutch dikes. So somehow there has been a terrorist attack on 5 of the Dutch dikes protecting our country. And as you have seen in the images, the consequence is that the water has run into our country. And this is dramatic effect where the Netherlands is no more. And this is a call to action to the students. Let me get rid of that for a second. I'll just stop the sharing. I think that's the easiest. So sorry about the sound. I chose not to try to fix that. It would have taken a lot of time. But essentially what you have been looking at is the call to action for students. Obviously, the Netherlands has a problem, and that problem has to be solved by students. And it will start with the basic of introduction to international law, where they have to figure out whether this indeed was an armed attack, which it was, and taking it from there and seeing whether the non-state entity that did this somehow can be linked to a state, etc., etc. And it builds from year 1 to more complex topics in year 3. So I hope the images speak for themselves. We chose a very dramatic case. In this case, it was an attack, but rest assured there is a climate change aspect in the background of this case, because obviously, this is not the real scenario, but we definitely intended that.
The tool that we are working with, that is good to mention. So I don't know, Simon, if you can share that slide. And otherwise I can share it. But the tool that we chose is Uptrack from IJsfontein, based in Amsterdam. So Uptrack allows us to work with this tool ourselves. So it's easy to use for people who do not know really that much about, online games and that sort of thing. So it's flexible to use and it's easy to use. There's a lot of options there that we can use different sort of scenarios and where students can branch off, but also very importantly, they can make mistakes. And that's also something that we really wanted, that we were really looking for in a tool. They help us a lot with the gaming elements. So obviously they might not know that much about the content of international law, but they do keep eye on us staying within gaming elements. And also very importantly, they really emphasize the importance of bringing things back constantly offline. So we plan events where things come back in real life. So we plan an event where students will be in a room and there will be some sort of hack or break-in from one of the perpetrators of this attack, and where there will also be physical clues in that room that students might or might not find. So we connect offline and online as well. And for educational purposes, it's really important that they meet all the security and privacy requirements that universities and other schools set us. So that's really helpful. I think that's basically it that we wanted to tell you. And I think, Sally, it's now time for the Q&A.
Yes, thank you very much. A bit over time, as could probably have been predicted, but I think we still have half an hour if there are enough questions to fill half an hour. I certainly have a few questions, but maybe just once again, for those who are in attendance, you can put your questions in the Q&A. Presenters, if you want to ask a question, please feel free to click the raised hand button or just jump in, and then we can get that discussion going. There's no questions in the Q&A yet, so I will maybe take my position as chair to ask a couple of my questions. I don't think I introduced myself, actually. I'm Sarah Thin, known as Sally Thin to everyone who knows me, and I'm also assistant professor at Radboud University in Nijmegen. So my first question links a few of the different presentations and is on the role of competition and the potential tension between competition and storytelling. Because I think some of the earlier presentations, the ones maybe more focused on role-play games in the sense of like Dungeons and Dragons and other kinds of systems like that, the focus is very much storytelling without competition. Whereas we heard from Tamar and Marie-Louise about the way in which obviously that is a competition. So you are kind of graded somehow on the way you carry out the role play. And similarly with Stephanie and Simon, there's maybe not a competitive element, but there are, I think, elements where you have a right answer and a wrong answer in the international law game. And then with the reenactment, obviously that's non-competitive, and I think there are clear reasons that you chose to go non-competitive. So I think this is maybe an issue that links many of the different presentations. So I was wondering if anyone would like to reflect on that tension between competition or right answers, wrong answers, grading, assessment, and the storytelling of role-play games. Anyone just jump in, it's fine. Yep. Oh,
Dalaki, go ahead. You did it the proper way.
I don't know about proper. This is just reinforce Western practices and raising your hand before you speak. It's also hard in a technologically mediated fashion. But I think it's interesting. I think it depends on the goal of what you're using a tabletop role-playing game for. So if you are intending it for different aspects, or if you're exploring a situation and there's no winning the situation. So recently in my health communication class, so I teach communication at the University of Utah, and we focus on various different aspects of health. And one week we focused on crisis and risk communication. So what do you do when something bad happens, preparing for it, and then when actually the bad thing happens. And I created a game that had competitive elements to it, but the overall goal was for them. Sorry, my dogs like to play right when I ever turn my microphone on, so I apologize. And so depending on what the goal is, and I wanted them to engage with sources and material and create these plans based upon the research they've been doing, their readings, the conversations in class. And so that even the game creation is surrounded by the rules. And so if there needs to be competitive elements because it is supposed to be mirroring what lawyers or doctors or health professionals need, then I think that's what the tabletop role-playing game needs to transition to. And in regards to my research in like community-based participatory research with Indigenous people, when it comes to health, it's really difficult to consider winners and losers when you're trying to build community, and not only build community, but also strengthen those bonds of those individuals. And that's often done through storytelling.
Tamar, I think your hand is number 2. So yeah.
Thank you. So maybe 2 aspects for us. Indeed, Jean Pictet is still a competition, but we try to balance also learning and meeting aspect. And what are the ways we do it? First of all, as the role develops and evolves and the teams play different roles, they have all opportunity to shine, to make the process fair. So that way, even if somebody had to play relatively, let's say, a negative role in one test, although we think there is no negativity, you have to protect certain values from whatever the role you play at the end of the day. Next time they will have a different role. But also I think in evaluation, we have encoded these things, which makes our competition a little bit different. We are not only grading teams on whether they got the legal arguments correct. There are other aspects, for example, teamwork, collaboration with other teams, ability to build on each other's argument. So that way, it's actually, apart from competition, it's also trying to make them make a common solution, come to an agreement, which I think is the most important aspect for us also. In real life, at the end of the day, they need to use this law either to protect, to agree on something, and move forward. the situation. That's why, although it's a competition, there are other elements also. For example, we also have an opportunity to give a best speaker, Gilbert Apollis prize, which is not necessarily a person who made the best legal arguments, but it's usually a person who speaks and tries to basically appease and all the ideas, you know, bring forward the test. And that way we try to balance the competition part.
Yeah, Wouter?
Yeah. So of course it depends on what you want to do with the game, but I think for us there were really strong reasons to remove the competitive elements, and a few ones were that if you have a competition, you need some kind of uniform criteria that you apply fairly. In other words, you set the boundaries to what can be done in an exercise. Whereas if you take that away, the unexpected has a place, and that also has to do with the especially if it's about court cases, the diversity of audiences. So we've had an instance where a team was deliberately seeking a conflict with the judges because their only aim was to have a good press conference after the court case. So yeah, what do? I think it's brilliant. And it's fun and it's provocative, but you can't catch this in set criteria beforehand. And then another thing which I personally, having been a judge in moot court competitions, I felt really uncomfortable and a bit cheating, because on the one hand I played along in the game, on the other hand I was the assessor of the game. It is as if you have the referee in your team or not, right? So I also think if you leave out the competitive, everybody is in the game and there's nobody half in the game, half outside the game. So there were some reasons for us to do this.
Marie-Louise?
Thank you. I just wanted to add one element to what Tamar was saying, is that in the competition, the Pictet competition, we had a role which is a tutor. So each team has a tutor, which is someone that has done the competition. And after each test, there is a session for the tutor to debrief with the team. The tutor cannot debrief on the substance. So it's really more on the process, on their performance, their organization, how they worked as a team, how they enter the role play as a team or as individual, and to help them to grow over the week and to learn on these aspects as well. And this is also an aspect that is being evaluated, how a team has progressed over the week. And after the competition, so both the judge and the tutor sends an evaluation report to the team and the university. So there is also always an opportunity to grow, to learn from the process, learning by doing, and they receive feedback on how they they react or they dealt with the different exercises. Thank you.
Thanks. I see we have a visitor behind Stephanie. We have a question in the Q&A, which I'll read out and then I've used my position as chair again to add on to it because it overlaps with one of my questions. So Stefan says, I'm curious to how you reflect on the relation between the game mechanics and student well-being. In what ways can these game settings help improve student well-being? I think that goes quite to the heart of your presentation, Chris. The kind of inclusivity and how we create these safe spaces and take into account students' well-being. But I was thinking similarly, but also in relation to some of the things that that Tamar said about kind of some of the students present being from conflict zones or from states that are in ongoing armed conflicts. And similarly, actually, with Wouter, in your presentation, when you mentioned this is a bit different, but when you mentioned the involvement of people from Ongwen's community, and so the involvement of people who are clearly very personally touched by these issues, In my experience, when I teach international law, sometimes I forget the reality because I'm thinking so much about the legal concepts. And I often have people in the class who are from Ukraine or from Israel or whatever, which are, we're talking about the cases involving those states. And they mean something very different to those who have a personal connection. So it's a very roundabout way of saying, yeah, maybe maybe you could reflect on that as well. I don't know which one of you wants to start. Yeah, Chris.
Thank you for the question. So tabletop role-playing games are extremely varied. The mechanics greatly vary. Some of them have facilitators, some don't. Some of them have kind of like stopping points to reflect and to check in with players and facilitators. Some of them are pure luck, depends on what you draw, what you roll, etc. If the game does not have the mechanic in there, I always suggest checking in, before the session, during the session, after the session, whatever that would look like, depending on the kind of setting that you're in. And I said in the chat in response to Joseph, I also do accolades at my table where the players vote. I don't vote, but the players get to vote. Like, who was the best role play? What was the most improved player, or whatever the game is, whatever the setting is going to change. But I think that tying into some of the games that Joseph was talking about. So I currently have a couple of games that I designed that that are published in different venues where they're based on professional development. So I have one on helping grad students navigate academic conferences. I have another one for freshmen that are entering the university, where they can role play what it's like to be a first year, where they're balancing different obligations, as well as their mental and physical health. And there's mechanics in there to help them improve those things. And the entire thing is done with assessment in mind, to have check-ins with the facilitator or the audience or other players at the end of each week, where they're kind of tallying up what their well-being is, because the well-being is literally one of the stats in that game. So I think it really depends on what the game is, what's the purpose of playing the game, what are the outcomes that you're trying to meet for that game. But always know that you have the power to change mechanics, you have the power to change narratives. So implementing those things to make sure that there is a space to recognize student well-being is very important.
Thanks, Chris. Tamar?
Perhaps with the experience we have, if I may say, developed the safeguards, because it's true, we at a time might have teams coming exactly from Ukraine, Georgia, and Russia. That was the situation this year. And for me, being also Georgian, the most gratifying is seeing these teams sitting together at the dinner and discussing the existing situation. So what we do actually somehow to, from our side, ensure the well-being. First of all, Marie-Louise mentioned that we do a third question, which is a motivation question from the teams, which gives us somehow the information about the background of the teams, which the organizing committee is aware, particularly when drafting the case, to take into consideration the sensitivity of the participants who come, for example, from the conflict situations. For example, there has been instances we had former child soldiers participating as a member of the competition, and we were very much alerted if we have to approach this issue to be sensitive to the case. And I remember him actually saying that he felt that way, like the competition was cautious. So this is the one thing what we have embedded. The second, we always before the test do the briefing where we explain the rules. It's actually me quite often doing this briefing for the teams, where we try to explain that this is a safe space for the teams coming particularly from the warring parties. And we need to remain respectful. Marie-Louise mentioned that tutors play a big role for us. They are helping us to during the week as the competition goes on to observe the emotional state of the teams as well, because some of these things might be sensitive when you are discussing the torture, CRSV or SGBV, which is reality, unfortunately, in the armed conflicts. It might be quite sensitive for the teams sometimes maybe to digest, so we try to balance. What we have introduced during the COVID and we retain now is a well-experienced nurse who have been working with emergency situation, who is also accompanying us throughout the competition for 1 week. If we see that there is need of her engagement, who has also capacity to help teams and the tutor, we usually link her with the teams to assist the teams if such a need arises. So it's true, it's not an easy way, particularly because quite often the tests, although they are fictitious, they reflect the situation. Looking at the example then Stephanie and Tans brought in, for me it's Kachovka Dem case, transferred to Netherlands, maybe because I know the situation. So imagine teams coming from the armed conflicts, they of course link all the cases to their life.
Wouter?
Yeah, well, since you asked me the question, but it was also, I think, a very important message on the chat by Joseph, which I totally agree with. It's the difference between uncomfortable and unsafe. And I hope that in the reenactment, people feel uncomfortable a lot of times. That's really productive. So, for example, at the end, there is the statement by Dominic Angwen himself, where he compares himself to Jesus and says, Jesus didn't suffer as much as I did. So you have this guy with 70 counts against him, and he makes this statement. Somebody has to perform it. It's really uncomfortable. It's really, really, really uncomfortable. But we had the best discussion after that. Also addressing this uncomfortableness. Then the people from Uganda, yeah, that was actually interesting because you also realize, at least I did that. So you have the idea there is somehow the Ugandan view, but of course there's not. So you see the diversity among the people. You see people from Kampala who had no clue about the case, really. So they say, oh, I learned about the case here. Then we had scenes in court where people from the north would say, yes, spirituality, it's a really important element. The ICC didn't address it. And people from the south would say, this wouldn't fly in a Ugandan court. So you have all these different things popping up. Can I also ask a question to Simon and Stephanie? Now I'm
please do. Yeah,
babbling anyhow. Fantastic, this plan. I'm really jealous. And I wonder, would you consider this to be something, because now you're kind of making an almost imperialist move towards the other courses in your bachelor program, right? So students constantly have to go back to international law. But actually, I think it's a really good thing for a whole curriculum. Because everybody recognizes. Yeah. Oh, we told them. How could they forget? Yes, of course they forget. Yeah. But I think it really goes beyond your individual course. And I was wondering whether the faculty is interested in this.
For now, it's just a pilot, but Simon has moved to Wageningen, so he will tell about his plans on implementing this in Wageningen as well. But indeed, so our direct colleagues, international law and European law are always somehow in one department, but our direct colleagues from European law, they're very interested as well. And we have the luck that we can now run this in a pilot. And then if we have results and then we can show the results, then obviously other departments are interested as well. But then we need to make one coherent story. So that's why we also started with this particular Dutch case, where we can bring all the other disciplines in as well. Obviously, we can, international criminal law, constitutional law, administrative law, all these things, they connect really well to that case. So you can just make it one big coherent thing. And Simon, you have really nice plans as well, right, for Wageningen?
Yeah. To add to that, I think that not trying to steal time from the other courses. Indeed, the great scenario would be that you actually connect different courses in the same scenario. In Wageningen, we have a different curriculum. In Nijmegen, it's really expanding continuously on international law, so it deepens. But in Wageningen, we have, for instance, the marine science bachelor. And that includes, cell biology to social sciences to law of the sea, etc., etc. And one of the problems with that bachelor is that students are complaining that the courses are not, there's no interaction between the courses. So they get these topics from specialist lecturers, for instance, a cell biologist, or from me being a lawyer. But they are not lawyers, nor are they biologists. So it's an interdisciplinary program. And the idea now is to use the same system, but then not deepen every course, but have elements of each course coming back in that case. Because students at the end of their bachelor are supposed to be marine scientists, which they are, and they integrate these different disciplinary courses into their work. So I have high hopes that it will work well, at least as well in Wageningen, and maybe even better because of the different curriculum. And to add to that, it's this was designed not as a international law thing. It's designed as a curriculum thing, so it can be just as relevant for biology, or you name the curriculum.
Also, if any of the presenters have any questions for each other, please do just jump in. I have a couple more questions, but if you have any, then please go ahead. Nope. Okay. Then I think we don't have very much time left, but I'll ask my final, maybe 2 questions together, and then we can wrap it up. My first question relates to something that I can't remember if it was Simon or Stephanie, but it was within your presentation. What one of you said, making the game so that what the students do, what they choose matters. Because that I think is quite interesting also from, my leisure time experience of playing Dungeons and Dragons is sometimes it can be quite difficult to run a game in that way. The term that you often use in Dungeons and Dragons is you end up railroading the players into making certain decisions so that the story makes sense and so that you can finish before like midnight and keep it, to a particular time scale. And so in general, I think that's something that I was wondering if maybe some of the more games-oriented people could reflect on as well, is where player choice and player autonomy matters and how to facilitate that, especially if you have I guess stricter parameters to play within, whether that's time, whether that's covering certain content, and so on and so forth. Stephanie.
Well, this is also very funny because you teach in various concepts, and I have not really talked about this with you. But what we prepare is like a few scenarios in advance, so where the students might end up with. So we don't know exactly what their choices are going to be, but we know, in sort of general outlines where they might end up. So we prepare a few scenarios, and then they end up going into one direction. We tell you when you start various concepts in which direction they went, and that's where you are going to pick up in your classes. So it's just a preparation thing. So we just simply are ready for the options that are available. And then you bring them back into sort of more one line.
Simon, go ahead.
Yeah, I think this actually is our initiative is not the most perfect for that, because we're dealing with 500 students. So in our case, it's really scenario branching. And the element I think is really important is that that if they make a certain choice, you follow up on it, even if it's the wrong choice, because it will show them what the result is. Very simple example in law, of course, missing a deadline, your case is thrown out. And then you're stuck with that. And then we will reboot our case. But I think it's really valuable if students experience that in a non-real setting. But to be fair, for our initiative, I don't think we have that much room to really have students, at least not individually. If they make a choice as a group, we can reflect it. But yeah, individual ideas will be difficult.
Yeah. Marie-Louise?
Yeah, so at Pictet, as the role play somehow happens live and in person, we have to deal with different parameters. So we have to ensure fairness among the team. But also we want to give a space for different teams to also, as you said, to have an impact, to give them space to see maybe an aspect that we haven't seen in a specific case. So when they receive a case, it's generally, it can be anything. It can be, for instance, an article of a newspaper saying the situation evolved that way. What they have as indication is their role, who they are. At the time they will be, the time of the test is at 15 minutes, 20 minutes, an hour. They will know the role of the other teams and they will know the role of the jury. What we give to the jury member is as well, the same document as the team have received, their role, the role of the team, the time, and we give them information about the law. What is the rules that the teams are expected to get out of this specific test? And we also give them some indications about, should there be, are there a friendly jury? Are they a bit more aggressive? Should they try to push the teams or to be very like silent to let the teams deal with the case? So the jury have a specific indication on how to play their role. But of course, they play, it's not scripted. So it's general indications just to ensure first that the teams have an occasion to get the right rules or to go in the right directions. The jury member may also help them when they see that the team is completely out of track or is missing something with their questions, with their interaction with the team. They will try to bring them in a specific direction, but they will also adapt to what the teams are bringing. And there is space for new legal argument, for different ways of seeing the case. And there is right and wrong answers always, but the important is also the way, the legal reflection and how the teams are able to apply the rules. But there is always each case are never, even if in some cases the jury will repeat the same test 2 or 3 times with different teams. None of the tests will be exactly the same because it's not the same person that they interacting with the jury member.
Thank you very much for those answers. I also noticed that Joe has put a couple of really interesting comments in the chat. I'm not going to read them all out. But yeah, in response to that question about the role of storytelling and also the way that digital game designers handle this question of branching outcomes and player autonomy. We are almost at past, so I'm going to round things up there. Thank you very much, everyone. One thing that I noticed that came out of this is that there are a lot of really helpful resources that have been shared both in the presentations and in the chat. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do my best with my technological skills to save the chat, and I'll also email around all of the presenters to share any resources that they would like. And then I'll have a discussion with the other members of the network to figure out the best way of hosting that, but so that we can start to get together some kind of database of resources for people who would like to think about starting their own role-play game or system, or borrowing some of the ideas that we've heard here, reenactments, or any other kinds of role-play focused systems. So thank you very much. This was inspiring and very informative, and a special thank you to all of our presenters, and thank you also to all the attendees that came online to watch. Thanks.
Thank you very much for organizing this.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sally.